Welcome to the Industry Born podcast. I'm Cullen Reichart, your host, and today we'll be covering almost anything related to cannabis.
Rolling. Okay, we're good. So what?
Well,
help me out, because honestly, I mean, obviously a seed comes out of the plant. I get that part of it, and you're breeding seeds or breeding for genetics, and then you're creating seeds and selling seeds.
Yeah.
But
I mean, honestly, like the whole cannabis seed industry has had such an evolution just in like the last few years, and it did really take off, like as you said, in like Amsterdam and those areas, and we had started breeding like way back in the like 1998, I think was when my dad first started breeding just for personal stock, because he was like, it's rough when you only have one crop a year and you have a fucking kid depending on it. It's like you can't keep getting cuts from random people and ending up with bugs and like these nightmares, and eventually he kind of was just like, all right, I need to make my own thing here.
Really?
And so it started with that, and it was just regular seeds basically. And
so like his stuff, that his strains, he would seed some plants and just have the crop for the next year.
I mean, I think the first thing he bred with, if I am correct, was like Salmon Creek Big Bud. It was like back when like strains weren't even necessarily really like strains yet. It was just kind of like a term would go along with a batch that, they all were kind of similar, but there was definitely
no rhyme or reason to it.
Exactly. It was kind of just, this is the Salmon Creek Big Bud. It produces big buds and it generally comes out super green. And like, that was really all that there was to it. And so seeing like things progress from what he was doing breeding then to now, it's definitely gotten really crazy. But I mean, him having a background with like salmon genomics and all of the fisheries stuff, he was able to kind of apply his past genomics research to his breeding. And I think that that's where it really took off, because if you really like consider it, most ag industries rely on the seeds. It's like kind of the best way to avoid pest contamination. And the real issue is being able to provide a uniform seed line. And so that's kind of been what we work on.
Your Monsantos, the evil empires, they sell seeds. It's a big deal. They sell those GMO modified seeds and stuff like that. That's big money.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's in regular ag. Those guys have to pay a lot of money for that seed.
It's like these days, I have a feeling as soon as it's like, federal legalization happens, that it is going to be a potential for Monsanto cannabis seeds
to get some Roundup Ready cannabis.
And, it's a scary thought. It really is, but we need to be thinking about that, because it's like realistically right now, it's like, now is the time that we get to educate consumers to like, be aware and to realize that the cannabis they want to smoke probably isn't like Monsanto or Burpee seed cannabis strains. It's like, the stuff that's cultivated with care. And, a lot of people even say like selective breeding technically could be like genetic modification. But realistically, when you look at a GMO, it's, you're adding in an outside gene to that specific thing.
Or disabling one or whatever, like with the Roundup Ready stuff. That's really interesting. I find that whole argument to be really tedious. I think, it was all sold to us under the guise of, oh, you're going to have hardier plants, bigger product, better, more healthy stuff, blah, 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 when really it was just so they could sell a bunch of fucking Roundup.
Yeah.
And that's just like...
And that's what it comes down to. And it's
crap.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, who wants to be consuming Roundup? Like, that's something that I definitely try my very best to stay away from. And like, even going into, the feed store, you see things that are like, advertising for spraying Roundup on your front lawn and stuff. And it's like, people really just are lacking this kind of education where it's like, that's not what you want. And realistically, the plant does have the ability to do all those things that, you might get from Roundup by itself.
Well, it's a proper maintenance and care of a garden, right?
Exactly.
It's a lot of work, and that's what they're trying to avoid is that actual, and I get it. When you see large, massive scale growing of food, and you can just fly over with an airplane and kill all the weeds, I get the appeal, but still, there's a price that's being paid on the other side of it for sure.
Definitely. And I think realistically we have an issue in our country, especially where people are constantly striving for like the cheapest way to produce things. And that is something that's a problem with consumer, like values. And it's like realistically when the consumers start shifting away from like, oh, what's the most affordable option, or what's the cheapest corn I can buy in the grocery store and start to think, okay, like what should I be putting in my body?
What's the best I can get?
You know,
for what I
and
can
I
afford.
think that is, where the cannabis industry is going to head as well, or at least I hope.
You hope so.
And we're kind of on a time crunch these days because it feels like, federal legalization is eking up on us, and that's when shit's going to
what do you think
get a
about?
little wild.
It is going to get. Chances are it's going to be another big bunch of bumps, but how do you think that's going to affect you, like the seed wise? I mean, with federal changes, like what do you think would be the change for you guys?
It's kind of iffy, and it's really hard to predict really anything these days in the industry. But our hopes is that now that we've kind of gotten our footing in Oklahoma and in Spain and all these new areas, we have our Oregon branch. We're about to try to launch New York. And so, we're hoping that as many places as we can get our foot in the door, that, when we do go federally legal, it'll be that much easier for us to be able to expand to those areas.
Do you have to, can you transport seeds?
No, not at all.
So you have to
basically, we have to start an entire new breeding project. It's kind of an exhausting process. What we usually do is, we're not doing it all ourselves, obviously. We don't have enough employees, we don't have enough resources to necessarily make that happen, but we'll find a partner in these areas. So in Oklahoma we found John, who he actually got to meet when he was down there, and his family, and they had recently gotten licensed, and so they had been growing our seeds, and they basically came to us and were like, how do we get your seeds in Oklahoma? And we were like, well, that's kind of a pickle, like do you want to do that for us? And so that's kind of how it starts, is we usually find someone who's super into it.
So just like cannabis,
licensed,
you have to produce locally to be in a local market.
Yeah. And it is slightly debatable because it's a seed, it doesn't technically carry THC, but for the most part we try really hard to play things by the books.
With, right?
Exactly. It's like, we don't want to be sitting there convincing the cops that the truckload of seeds,
it's just
they're
seeds,
like, but there's not THC.
And
so, as soon as things in Cali kind of started to go legit, we were like, we should probably go that route too. We want to be able to put our product in dispensaries. And as soon as we made that decision to be licensed here, it was kind of like, okay, we have to be licensed everywhere else we participate in.
Yeah.
And, it was one or the other. And there's lots of people still doing seeds that, haven't necessarily chosen that route. And I'm all for that. I support it. I don't think that seeds or, any of this stuff should be this heavily regulated in my opinion. But, and then again, you got to play the game.
Yeah, you do. And I think, without the federal government having any say, the states are just fucking it up. You know what I mean? They're just making a mess out of the whole deal. It almost
feels like they're, trying to make all these farmers make amends for the years they didn't pay taxes. They're like, we're going to take as much taxes out of your pocket as possible now.
Right. Because, so do you guys have licensing problems like that too? Do you have a big licensing fee, or is it just like a standard cultivation fee?
We pay an extreme amount of taxes every year just based on sales, and for every single one of our licenses it costs an arm and a leg as well, and that's not even really factoring in the random hoops they give you.
So your taxes are higher because of, you're getting basically, you're full on cannabis company.
Yeah, we get treated just like we would be producing flower.
Really?
Essentially, yeah. Wow. So we can't deduct just about anything
you can't
but
deduct
cost
anything.
of goods sold.
Right.
And so that's a little bit inconvenient as
a
well,
little bit,
when you have to go travel all over the place just to do your job and to, get your brand out there, and you can't deduct any of that. It's like, kind of a bummer.
Pretty brutal.
Can't deduct any advertising.
I'm an equipment company. Thankfully, I can deduct all my expenses on equipment, right? And I can deduct all of that stuff, because from that perspective, from a federal tax perspective, I get to act like a normal business. From a lending perspective, I get the same treatment that everybody in cannabis gets. But I understand that value, and when I buy equipment, I buy it specifically thinking about that value, because it makes a big difference to me at the end of my year. Buying a piece of equipment can help me shelter income for the next year. And I'm investing in growing my business. I can't even imagine, having to pay for all the equipment these guys have to pay for, and they get basically zero out of it. They get the value of the equipment, which is good, but still, there's so much sheltering of income that they should be able to do,
Yeah.
and so much value they should be gaining. They can't get any of it.
Yeah, well, and it's not, that's why it's almost not like, you're starting just a regular business. And
Yeah.
I see a lot of folks that kind of go all in and went all in right in the beginning. And,
Yeah.
they got all the equipment, they got all their stuff, they got all the permits.
Yeah.
And then really like tax season comes around and they're like, oh God, like
Yeah.
I'm really screwed here.
Yeah.
And it's sad,
Yeah.
but like none of us are really trained for this. Like my
Right.
job didn't used to have anything to do with a laptop. And the other day my dad called me at 7 a.m. and he goes, do you have your computer on you? And I'm like, I'm in bed. And he was like, I always have my computer on me these days.
Yeah.
And I was like, what are we now? Like,
Wow. So your dad started the company. How long ago?
he started, so he technically went into the state and got the name in 2001. And,
Okay.
we didn't tell them necessarily that it was cannabis seeds. We kind of implied that it was veggies and a whole range of things.
Right.
And we have made squash strains before, so, we weren't necessarily bullshitting entirely, but we kind of kept ourselves like on the DL for
Yeah.
a long time. And
Yeah.
we had people pressuring us to make a move to go to Spain and to go to Amsterdam. And, we actually had someone that was working for my dad a little bit that was like, I'm gonna go to Spain and start Humboldt Seed Company. And we were like, cool, go. And he was like, no, you guys should really come out here. And my dad was like so involved in the Undam the Klamath movement
Yeah.
and all of these local organizations, as well as raising me out here,
Yeah.
that he was like, no, like, I foresee things to happen here. It's gonna take
Yeah.
off eventually, and I don't want to go over there. And next thing you know, they're over there calling themselves Humboldt Seed Organization.
Oh.
So, it took a lot of patience. And for me, I really had to like teach myself to kind of follow my dad's patience rule, because
Yeah.
I was over there being like, you should be getting all this recognition. Like, why can't we send our seed packs all over the place
world,
right
right.
now?
Yeah.
We had like HPRC and all of the local classic dispensaries and, all of our
Yeah.
homey bulk farmers. And that was it for a long time. And, somehow the genetics would make their way to other places like Blueberry Muffin. We started that, I think, in 2008. And
Really?
just a few years later, we had people in like whole different countries being like, hey, I'm running your genetics. And so
Wow.
it was cool to see, even while we were kind of in hiding, his genetics still were making their way
Yeah.
across the globe.
So how does you go about the genetics thing? Like, I mean, is he like, are you have an active breeding program, or are you? I mean, how does that happen? Because
I mean,
that's
basically-
like the one thing that I really know less than zero about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our entire cultivation pretty much at this point is dedicated to our breeding.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of pheno hunting with other local farmers, which
Yeah.
is honestly something that has been one of the biggest advantages to come out of the permitting process, is
Okay.
having access to folks that are growing
Right.
5,000, 10,000 plus of our genetics and being able to pheno hunt. It's such like a large resource
Right.
there. But, we kind of have our whole site at this point dedicated to our breeding chambers. And
So do you have to backbreed and do all the same thing
Absolutely.
that, like, because you're trying to refine that specific
Yeah, so for
phenotype down, or find that rock star pheno, right?
For stability, it really just takes like a lot of time and dedication. And, there's a lot of new folks trying to come in, and I'm all for like, I almost call it pollen chucking, when you're
Yeah.
creating a random cross that sounds cool. Like you could be like, oh, I'm gonna cross, mince and runts, and that sounds epic. But realistically, it's like could be the same as crossing a pug and a poodle. You're gonna get an array of different
A
results.
lot of different stuff in that.
And
that
then
litter.
you have to take that and select for, the one that
Right.
is the exact combo you're going for. You're like,
Yeah.
I really wanted the pug nose, but like the poodle curly hair.
Right.
So, you find that pheno, and then you're gonna have to continue to breed it. And,
Right, to try and refine
breed
it and get it
select
consistent
for that
and-
stable pheno.
and strong and stable. Wow.
And that's something that, my dad has been able to provide because he's been doing it for so long.
And
like
then
our
how-
muffin, for example, is an F9 at this point.
Really?
And that's one of the most stable seed lines I've ever come across, to the point where, you can put it all in the same batch, bag it all up the same, and it's not going to be an issue for
Really?
you or your buyers, or,
You're totally comfortable with that going out the door.
Yeah.
You know it's all going to be really consistent.
Yeah, well, if you're selling people a batch of seeds for any kind of mass production, they're running 10,000 plants. Like,
Right.
they don't want to have to go through and be like, all right, this one looks like this one, and this one goes with this one, and, mix and matching.
Wow.
And so I think that that's really like one of the things that, seeds really need to start
Yeah.
gaining and, providing for growers, because that's one of the biggest appeal of clones, is that, you're
Right,
going to have
you get
the
the
same
same thing.
results
Yeah.
around and around.
Yeah.
But you can do the same thing with seeds, and you've seen it in just about every other industry. It's
Yeah.
not like you go into the store and buy corn
Yeah, I buy my
clones.
heirloom seeds, you know,
Yeah.
I know what I'm getting.
Yeah, or like
Yeah.
tomato clones.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, you know, you get the seeds, and
Right.
so
Wow.
I do foresee things kind of shifting that way. Obviously, there's, you know, there's benefits to cloning as well, but when
Yeah.
you're doing large scale production and seeds are so much more affordable, and you're kind of eliminating some of your risks of pests.
Is there any truth to the idea that seeds make a hardier plant?
I agree completely, because
Yeah.
I mean, realistically, you know, it's kind of just like a hereditary thing. When you've
Yeah.
grown something in a certain environment for long enough, it does acclimate, and it can develop resistances to certain things. Like,
Yeah.
you know, if your genetics have gotten spider mites one year and you're doing a breeding project in there, the next year,
Yeah.
the hopes is that the plant is going to like compensate for that and
Right.
automatically acclimate itself to the environments and the potential hazards that it's facing. 'Cause it's just like natural evolution, you know?
Right. Interesting. Well, because I know that I never grew from seed. I always grew from clones, and I know that I was susceptible to certain things. You know, specifically, you'd find out, and you're like, oh wow, this is really, why is it like this? And I always thought it was because, you know, you have such a consistency in environment, but then also consistency in the genetics that, yeah, if you found something that's specifically like that, you're kind of a target. You know, you're kind of in trouble. There's no buffer of genetics to give you any kind of strength in a room full of the identical twins. So I always thought that was kind of interesting, but I never really understood why you couldn't just clone on clone on clone on clone until mine died, and then I was like, okay, I guess you can't.
You're
but
like, oh.
I guess they were right, and I didn't understand it. But I never did grow from seed, and that's, I find it really interesting. So I mean, but to have seeds, like, you know, for a farmer that's got acreage, you've got hundreds or thousands of seeds.
Yeah. And
That's a lot of seeds. I mean, how many seeds do you get out of a plant?
it honestly depends on how well we do our job. Like, you know, I'm gonna be the first to admit we've had failure breeding batches, because it's kind of tricky, especially when you're
Yeah.
doing feminizing. Because what you do there, we started, of course, just doing regular breeding batches.
Yeah.
But with fems, you have to reverse the sex of your female plant, and that's when you get it to produce just the feminized pollen.
Okay.
And so you kind of have to get your plant reversed and ready to produce that feminized pollen right at the same time that your other plants are going into flower. And so it's
I had no idea.
kind of all a timing game for us sometimes. And it's rare that we really mess up, but, you know, we've had years where we dedicate a big chamber and we get like 10 seeds out of it. And we're like,
Oh my
oops. And then, you know, there's times where we get hundreds of thousands of seeds out of
Really?
the chamber, just as long as it's timed correctly and our donors are happy and they're pumping out pollen, then
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
that's how you get a feminized seed. As
Yeah.
you hermaphrodite, or you change the sex on a female plant.
Yeah, but our thing has always been, we never started feminizing until we had a foolproof system for getting
Right.
just about anything to flip, because, you know, in our opinion, if you're gonna have,
Is
you
that
know,
a company
say,
secret? How to get them to flip?
kind of,
Okay,
yeah. I
I
mean,
won't
the
ask.
recipe is a little bit secret. You can find the gist of it on Google, but, you know,
Okay.
we've had our variations and we've really fine-tuned it over the years. Now we have our like perfect one, and we're probably never gonna tell anyone what it is.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I'd keep that secret.
But you know, you could have like a batch when you first start trying to do it, and you're trying to get 10 different plants to flip and reverse
Right.
their sex. And say, you know, you're spraying all of them with whatever you're spraying, and only one of them flips. And then you take that one and do your breeding project with it. It's like, you know, yes, you do have feminized pollen, but at the same time, you're potentially breeding in a natural characteristic to one, a hermaphrodite. And
Interesting.
so for us, we kind of waited until even like the most resistant strains would flip for us.
Got it.
Because, you know, that way we know it's just not like a plant that's tenant to one, a herm under stress.
Right.
And I think that that's kind of where feminized genetics maybe got a rep of like, you know, they're more likely to herm than regular genetics. But these days it's like, you know, no matter what
it's
you're going to
almost
do.
all feminized. Like, you can't really find. As a
Yeah.
matter of fact, most of the big seed houses, I don't think they do anything but feminized seeds.
Yeah, I mean,
They
we
don't
still
really
try to
want you,
provide both, because we
yeah.
have a lot of like old school folks that are really like they are like, oh, we only grow reg seed and that's it. And it's hard to change people's ways, you know,
Yeah.
especially these old school growers.
Yeah.
You know, they're like, oh, hell no, I'm not doing that plastic netting. Like, not doing that. I'm not doing this. And I'm like, that's fine, you know.
Plants are supposed to be 20 feet tall and 800 feet around. You're like, okay, got it, Pops, got it.
Yeah, you're like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Whatever you say.
Yeah, they do it. It's very interesting. I'm sure you have equipment that I've seen some seed separators. You have like a seed separator machine?
Yes, we do now, thankfully. You know, back in like way back in the day when we were first kind of getting started, we weren't even really charging for the seeds, and we would sit there and someone would come up and they'd say, I want to get my seeds for the year, and we'd grab the buds in like plates and we'd start breaking them up and pulling out the seeds, and it would take like hours. They'd always bring us a 6-pack of beer and we'd sit at the table.
But you
and
guys
pull
started
the
just
seeds
like
out
everybody
one by
else
one.
in this industry.
Yeah.
Doing everything the hard way.
You know, now it's like I'm halfway replaced by machines at this point. No more like breaking up the buds and pulling the seeds out.
Wow.
But
I would never.
it makes it a lot easier.
So you're distributing in regional markets and not doing the international marketing yet.
Yeah, no, not necessarily. Our branch in Spain does have a little bit more leeway, I guess.
Okay.
And, you know, they're not really as direct about the rules there. And so it's like, you know, as long as you're paying your bills and you're doing what you're told, kind of, they're not going to come on you too hard.
I ordered some seeds. I only got the one set that I told you about, but I think I ordered some seeds one time and they never showed up. And I always just thought that, well, that's how it goes, you know?
Yeah.
I can't expect the U.S. Postal Service to deliver seeds every time.
Yeah,
maybe
no,
next
it's a little
time.
bit of a risk. And I mean, we've always been a little bit scared too. Like, you know, we just kind of launched over there in the last few years, and we kind of have kept it small and just in this area of Spain. But, you know, back in the day, I like was telling my dad, hey, we need to get on Instagram. We need to get on social media. And I was like 13 or 14 years old. And finally I was like, I'm just going to make us a company Facebook. Whatever.
Nice.
And I went on and I made it, and I like used my mom's phone number because I didn't have my own phone at the time. And like a week goes by, and next thing you know, we have like a federal agent on my mom's phone, and he's like, so what is this about Humboldt Seed Company on Facebook? And like, luckily as the conversation evolved, she's like looking at the page with the guy, and she's like, yeah, like there's a lot of typos. Like I'm 99.9% sure this was like our 14-year-old daughter, and you know, I wouldn't take any of this seriously. They left us alone after that, but it was like kind of a scare, you know? I felt really bad. I was like, oh God.
Yeah.
After that, it was like, it was work to get my dad to start an Instagram from that point on.
I
He was
imagine
like, oh,
so.
but you remember what happened last time, right?
Like, well, I mean, golly, the culture up here too, man, it's been so clandestine and so close knit, you know, that when I first came up here was in 2012. I brought up a machine, and I was like, oh, everybody up here grows weed, so I'm gonna be able to sell this machine, you know. And I started poking around to find people, and it was like, yeah, you don't talk about that. And if you do, people really quickly go, don't talk to that guy, and you kind of get ostracized, you know. And I figured that out really quick. Like, you just don't have those communications. And then once you get in, you know, if you get in, then you're in, and you can then you can navigate a little bit slowly. But you know, those were kind of scarier times, I think.
It's a hard place to really get introduced to, and it takes a while for people to really like gain that trust as well. And you know, my dad wasn't born here. I was kind of born into the industry, I guess, which is fitting considering this is industry born podcast.
Yeah, see, so you're industry born. There you go.
But you know, he made his way out here on Dead Tour and ended up at like a little old hippie commune, and
said,
next
I'm staying.
thing you know, I think, you know, I like to think of myself as like a happy accident, but I definitely wasn't a planned child, and he was only 19 at the time I was born. And we had like a one-room cabin with an outhouse, and you know, we were out there.
That's very Northern California.
But fortunately, he had started initially, you know, working for the Salmon River Restoration Council and working with the Undam the Klamath movement, and I think that's kind of what gave him the ability to integrate himself into the community so much, is because, you know, they were like, you're not just here for this green rush, and you know, he ended up getting this amazing mentor, Peter Brucker, who really was the first person to teach him everything he knew about growing at the time. And you know, from there on is when the breeding started. And
so why go into breeding when you're in the growing? And growing's where like everything is at.
Well, you know, back then, honestly, everyone was like, "You're crazy, dude. Like, you mess with pollen." It was like a scary thing. You know?
Oh yeah, because that'll kill everything.
Yeah, they're like, "Oh God, I'm not coming anywhere near your farm."
No
like,
pollen.
Yeah,
Stay away from that
people
guy.
that would mess around and be like, "Oh, I need to shower after I come over here for dinner." Like,
Yeah.
But I think for him, it was really just having access to the quality of genetics that he wanted.
Yeah.
You know, I think we had like a couple seasons where we would get a clone from somebody and they'd be like, "Oh, this is this," and you know, it's the bomb. And then you grow it out, and next thing you know, you
spend all year and then
bugs,
you got zero.
and the genetics aren't what you were told they were anyways, and it was like a disappointment. And so I think it was more like a self-sustainability thing at first. Was he was like, "I want to be able to do what I'm doing, but not have to rely on anyone else to do it."
How many different strains are you working on at a time?
You know, we try not to really get ourselves into too many like serious breeding projects at once, at least for what we intend to release to the public for the year. I think right now we're working on like 3 new auto strains, and we might only release 1 photoperiod line this year.
Really?
You know, we kind of have to do our R&D process, and we know one for sure is going to be ready and worth it, but the rest of them we got to kind of run our R&D on and see if they're going to be ready.
How long does that take?
It depends on the line, because you know, with some crosses you kind of get lucky right away and they're a little bit more stable. With some you get like a very wide array of phenotypical differences, and those lines can take 3 to 4 years to work them into something that, you know, we feel confident releasing.
That makes sense. I mean, that seems like a long time, but 3 to 4 years. And
well, it takes a while. I mean, realistically, like where I start with any new line is, you know, I go out to the farm and I take a cutting off of everything in their field, unless it's like clearly, you know, a weird strain. It's like carrying a mutation or it has terrible structure and, you know, you're just not into it. But for the most part, we're like getting as many genetics as possible and hoarding them, and you know, then we go back and we make our selections, and you know, we usually pick like 5 to 10 for the season. And then, you know, we are running R&D and doing small breeding projects on those.
How do you
until
keep
we're
that?
ready to do
How do you keep that going? Like, there's got to be some time in there where you're holding backs. Like, this is where we started. So you got to hold on to this because we tried it over here, and I want to keep that in case I got to go back there. But how do you, right? I mean, because you're going to go down this road at some point in time.
It's a lot. I mean, we have, you know, we constantly have what we call our like genetic library running, which is where we'll keep our phenotype hunt winners. And, you know, we're constantly kind of cutting off of the moms and trying to
so you just keep
get
them
the line
perpetually
to expand further.
in growth mode. And
we just
keep them
you
around
know,
as long
we'll
as
keep
you
them
can.
in veg and as long as we can until we have like a new clone batch going. Eventually we usually kill off the original mom, and then we have, you know, a batch of our 10 moms we got off of that one as cuttings, and then, you know, from there we can go into a bit of production, and we'll usually R&D it as just a clone line for one season while we're getting ready, and we'll do, you know, we'll do at least one full-term R&D batch, and then one mixed light, and then one indoor.
Yeah.
And we have lots of people that we collab with on that stuff, so, you know, that's another aspect that's positive about the whole legalization thing.
Yeah. Well, right. I mean, it just seems like a lot to me, because I really found myself not being quite attentive enough to be very good at growing. And so the idea of, you know, doing all that work and keeping all that data just blows my mind. That you would, you know.
It's a lot to keep track of, and especially for us where we're like, there's never enough genetics, and you know, we can never have enough. We're like hoarders at this point.
Yeah. So are you like thinking like a couple years out, or are you just kind of like, are you trying to follow the trends, like these mass trends at all, or you're just really trying to find really killer stuff and go, yeah, this is killer?
For us, it's kind of, you know, the third one where we're really just looking for what we think is going to be something killer that's going to do well for our farmers. Because as much as you can follow the trends, it's like like if we had started doing like a ton of stuff with ice cream cake and wedding cake, like 2 years ago or last year,
it would have had to been years ago.
We wouldn't be really super ready to produce that line until, you know, next year, and by then nobody wants that anymore.
Right.
Everyone's already over it by this year.
Okay, so that's kind of a problem then. So you can't really go, this is what's hot, let's design something around that, because that's too late.
Yeah.
Because what's hot is,
you know,
kind
occasionally if we find something that we think is gonna kind of keep its traction for a while, like, you know, we've done a few projects with like runts, like, you know, we have a white runts jelly rancher that we're probably gonna release eventually, and you know, it'll be cool, but I have a feeling that by that time, runts probably isn't going to be the new cool thing anymore anyway.
Right.
So, you know, that part is a little tricky.
Just change its name. No one will ever know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know, you could. We try to do our best to not do too much of that, though, because there's honestly a lot of people out there who are just like putting whatever they want to on the label.
Yeah. I was
like,
going to say,
right,
that's pretty common, right?
$500 for this seed pack at auction. And we're like, you know, we try to keep ourselves
They do the same thing with the
not overcharge.
With the cannabis bags. I mean, I remember when we were, years ago, when I was helping to distribute, you know, we like, what is that? I don't know. What are you going to call it? I don't know. It smells kind of fruity. Oh, let's call it this. And, you know, you just throw a name on it. And it was and that was very common because, I mean, there wasn't really much tracking going on, and it wasn't nearly as, people weren't paying nearly as much attention, right? You knew certain things, you know, would come in and you'd know, a Jack Herrera or a Bull Rider, like that was still legendary, a Sour Diesel or something like that. But most of the time there was so much variety, and we were getting a lot more in Southern California that was actually coming from the hills, right? Whereas now it's kind of homogenized, but you get a lot more variety, and you just didn't have names. It was just like, you know, somebody did a really good job with this stuff, and I don't know what it is, but we'll call it something. So we used to just kind of make up names too, and I think that, I mean, it's obviously not the same game as it was. I don't know where I was going exactly with this, but I thought it was kind of interesting because I never really understood. I mean, I understand pharmacology from a naming perspective. I understand why they come up with those stupid unpronounceable names, but I'm wondering, like, where's, like, in cannabis, is there's really no genetic naming structure. Like, it's not Latin based. It's just like,
no, not at all. I mean, honestly, that's like one of our biggest struggles every year. We're still like grouply debating on what we're going to name our new release for this year. We have like our pheno hunt number for it, which was M30. But like, we can't call it M30 necessarily.
No?
And every time one of us thinks of a name, it's like we go and we start scouring Instagram and Leafly and anywhere, and like 90% of the time it's already a strain somewhere somehow. And so, you know, maybe eventually we do need to shift into kind of having like a more serious naming system for these things and making it a little more scientific.
It should have some scientific basis to it, because I mean, that's ultimately what you're talking about. You're talking about genetic structure, and you're probably going to want to call out, you know, where it sits in the like, if it's going to be compact or tall or lanky or fingery, and you're going to call out like what it's going to have for its terpenes and all that. That could all be in the naming, but then you're going to get these really like interesting Latin names that no one gives a shit about. Yeah.
But, you know, the thing is
they're still going to call it Girl Scout cookies. You're like, God dang it.
But most things do have a scientific name and then a generalized name as well. And so, you know, as much as I do see all of the like classic trendy names surviving and going on, there's nothing wrong with having a scientific name out there as well that you can reference. And I do feel like, you know, the more we progress as an industry, we kind of need to start thinking about things like that.
You would think so. They have to do something about it, right? But I think there's also something happening that's different in this industry than maybe other ag industries. It's a lot going on in the pheno development and in the strain development. A lot going on. Yeah. Like, everybody is trying to get the next big thing. So there's tons of genetic movement all the time, and all this is going. It's like, okay, that maybe it's going to be hard to keep up with because of that volume. It really is. Right?
I mean, but it's been amazing to watch, like, the progression that's been made in just this short time. And maybe it's really just that people are actually able to kind of shout it out to the world now and proclaim it. Like, before, back in the day, I would have freaked out if I saw a dude with a camera walking through our fields. But now it's like the normal. It's like every other week we're like, oh, this videographer is going to stop by. And, you know, we actually get to publish what we're doing and, you know, share it with other people and talk to people in these new places and hear what they're doing over there. And, you know, I think that opening up those doors has really led to like a lot of moving forward as far as like, you know, what people are producing, what genetics are available, and even just, you know, growing strategies and, you know, marketing strategies, everything. It's a very unique industry to be in because it's like one of the few industries I feel like in our nation that is kind of just beginning and still evolving, and it's under-researched as well.
And there's something else I think is interesting too, is that it's really close to its culture in some respects. Like the cannabis culture, we're as an equipment company, we're not so close to cannabis culture as, you know, as the people who grow are, obviously, and the seed people. So you have people who are gaining a name in the culture and putting their name on a genetic, may or may not be any good, right? But that still pushes, I don't know how many stinking farmers go out and grow, you know, John's Bubba, whatever they want to call it, whatever it is, but you know what I mean? It's attached to that famous name, and so everybody goes down. And that's not necessarily the right way or wrong way to do it, but it's really tied to that culture kind of wave, and that's putting a lot of pressure. I think it puts a lot of pressure on this environment, to be honest with you. I'm just having the conversation I've had with a couple of you know, growers up here. They struggle because they don't have the latest crazed indoor fad, right? So, but that doesn't mean they don't have really beautiful, great cannabis to offer, and they don't do a great job. It doesn't mean any of that. What it means is they're not on the prima donna marketplace. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I do think that's definitely one of the disadvantages these days is, you know, you see a lot of like the hype cannabis brands going around. And as much as I respect anyone who's making it these days in these industries, it's like, you know, it's kind of sending consumers the wrong direction. And what's really important is to like make sure the consumers who are going into these shops are educated on what they're acquiring, because you know, anytime I go into a dispenser, I hear probably 5 people be like, what's your highest THC eighth? And you know, it's kind of what everyone's going for. And for me, I'm like a terpenes girl all through. Like, you know, I like to get stony, but at the same time, like a good flavor and a nice like terpene high can definitely tell the difference. And so people, like, you know, they're not really considering this stuff quite yet. And there's no drive for farmers to list their terpenes on their jars because nobody's asking about it quite
yet. You know, we're starting to see it a little bit, but you know what? I think the numbers don't make a lot of sense, right? 3.8% terpenes. It's like, you know, okay.
Well, you see stuff like that, and it's like, you know, someone will be like, it's 33% THC and then 3.8% terpenes or whatever their numbers are, and you're like doing the math in your head, and you're like, so like, you know, where's the chlorophylls, and you know, where's the rest of the bud? Like the way that they break it down, you're like, so like your bud would basically melt in the sun. If that was actually true. But the labs, like, you know,
they've fed into this whole,
it's a business for them too. Like our lab that we were going to for years that gives us super accurate results almost shut down this year because they're like, nobody wants to come to us anymore because we don't lie on our THC test results.
Well, right. So I mean, you got guys who do every shady trick they can to get those numbers up. Like they over dry and then they rehydrate, and you're just like, dude, you know, if you didn't focus here, we could create. You could really open up this marketplace. But I think the concentrate game is also focused on the intensity issue. And nothing wrong with concentrates, and for people who like them, that's great. But it's changed the conversation. Although I would say like your live resins and stuff like that, where they're trying to focus back on getting more of the full entourage and the full effect kind of thing going on. But you know, your shatters and your waxes are pretty much just like, okay, this is get as much THC as you can in here, and that's what the game is. And I think I have a lot of guys that work for me, and that's what they do. They're like, you know, I know I would die if I did concentrate, so I don't. I'm smart enough to know that, but they that's what they do. And I'm like, okay, you're missing, like, there's something you've never experienced. Because you don't understand what's missing from that picture, right?
Yeah,
and
definitely.
There's a ton of stuff that's in there that is missing.
Yeah, but you know, at the same time, it's like we're all out here just kind of trying to play the game, and it's funny because it's always been kind of referred to as the weed game, but now that it's legal, I almost feel like it's even more of a game. You know?
Well, you've got bigger players, so you got to play harder. Yeah,
exactly.
It's like the professional game now.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's like a scary world, but I feel like Humboldt is always going to have that craft name to it, and as long as we kind of keep doing things like this where we're collabing with folks and we're telling our stories and, you know, we're educating consumers on what product, you know, they might want to be smoking and what questions they might want to be asking about what they're smoking.
There was this interesting company when I started getting into the business of machines and was looking to get financial support. They were called, the name of the company was Ebu or Ebu, I think it was EBBU, and their whole thing was classifying the full list of cannabinoids and what each of those things did, right? So the idea was that you could break apart a specific strain by it's percentages of limonene or whatever, you know, and all the other terpenes, and then THC, and then you could tell by that how this was going to affect you. So you could have an idea, because you know that this is the things you like. You know, like when you're going to drink wine, you're like, I like this varietal, I like stuff grown in this region, that kind of thing. They were trying to do that with cannabis. I don't know whatever happened to them. They probably just didn't make it.
But that sounds like a really cool project.
Pretty cool project.
But yeah, the thing is like, you know, there's not much profit to be made when you're doing things like that, and when you're researching such a brand new industry, and people like consumers aren't really catching on to your idea. As amazing as you know developing that would be, and as much resources it would provide, it's like, unfortunately, people like that aren't really getting encouraged to do that research, because everyone's so focused on like, oh, what has the most THC, or, you know, is it indica or sativa? And really, it's like, if you dive into it, there's so much more to it. Every single terpene can affect you differently, and
for sure,
you know, you want to know like how it's going to affect you as thoroughly as possible.
They were going really at the medical side, and they had a really interesting staff. Like, they were really heavy. I think they had 2 or 3 PhDs involved, and like they were sucking up money like nobody's business. Like, they were getting funding after funding after, like, millions and tens of millions of dollars were getting thrown into this concept. I'll look them up and figure out what they're doing with themselves now. But I thought it was interesting. I haven't seen anything since that time, so I'm assuming that they weren't successful yet, which I don't know how you could be. But I always thought that was really interesting, and it kind of goes along with the like scientific classification conversation that we just had a minute ago, right? So you can take this all down, you can break it down very rigidly, and then classify, and then subcategorize, and then really get all the details, and then you could know a lot more. But I mean, you know, I don't know if we'll get there or not, but it sounds like a cool idea for somebody to do.
Yeah, and you know, I honestly do see a point where we will get there, because you know, I don't think cannabis is going anywhere. So
it doesn't look like it.
And just based off of what's happened in the last 3 or 4 years here, it's like, you know, I can't wait to see what we've discovered in 10 years, and you know, the way that it's being used for medical purposes. I just met actually a really amazing lady in Oklahoma at the event there. We were on a panel together. Her name is Dr. Z, or Dr. Zinnia, and she's been doing a lot of like terpene research with aromatherapy and just those effects and things like that. And you know, she's a PhD as well, and to see people like really catching on and getting interested and taking the time, you know, and she basically was like, I, you know, got really tired of prescribing my clients with, you know, random pills, and then having to prescribe them to something else to mitigate the side effects of the other pill, and like, you know, yada yada yada. And she was like, that's when I really started diving into this, and like noticing like, hey, if we, you know, give somebody this terpene for, you know, this long in aromatherapy, it gives them these effects. And it's things like that where I'm like, you know, that's what we want to see here. It's a medicine, and I think, you know, that's why so many people are so in love with this plant, is because...
Well, I don't know why doTERRA hasn't picked it up, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
doTERRA, you know, you know, those guys.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I just am really looking forward to seeing where it all goes.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, we could imagine a lot about where it is going to go, but it's kind of going really fast.
It's going really fast.
It's going as fast as it can go.
You know, all we can all do is kind of keep trucking along and try to keep up with things.
Keep your head above water.
You know, they keep throwing the next curveball at us left and right, and it's kind of like it's a game of dodgeball at this point, honestly. We're like, dodge, duck, and weave. Isn't that the quote from that movie?
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting to see like how it affects different. I mean, we're affected. We were just talking about this earlier today. Like, this company is affected when the culture is affected, or the whole industry in California is being drastically affected by overproduction. People don't have the ability that they would have had, so we're seeing the effects of on the equipment market. So it ripples through, you know, completely ripples through the whole thing when you see, especially a massive market like California. Oh my God, this is like huge.
It's you know, realistically, it's consuming just about all the resources that some of these farmers have, and especially in an area like Humboldt, where you can't just easily expand your farm 5 acres. Right. You know, that would cause a nightmare of grading permits and destroying the forest surrounding yourself, and nobody really wants to even do that up here. Right. And so, you know, all these folks are relying on is the fact that we have this craft name here, and you know, that hopefully consumers catch on to the fact that we've been doing this longer than just about anyone else up here, and we
might actually know what
how
you're
to
doing.
produce the good stuff. It's like, I don't, like, personally, I may be a little bit biased, but if I had to choose any day between a 10-acre SoCal farm and smoking a jar of weed from a small family farm up here, I would choose the one up here any day of my life.
Any day of the week, yeah. Well, it's so it's interesting that that's gotten lost to me, because this is really what it's always been, right? This is legend. Like, this is like, you went to Humboldt, you know why you went to Humboldt. Like, you can say, I'm gonna go to Humboldt. Everybody's like, oh yeah, all right, bring me back some weed, man. That's what it was. It's always been that. And then to see it like completely change into this mass marketed phenomenon that it is, and to have Humboldt go, oh, and get kind of left behind because of just the push in the culture side of it, and the push toward these whatever brand of the flavor of the week is, it's kind of shocking to see it. I'm sure it'll bounce back, but it's probably going to bounce back in that legacy way, like that craft wine legacy kind of tour, people coming out and seeing this, what it was all about from the beginning. But it needs to start happening quick.
Yeah, well, and I really hope that is the case. And I mean, like, I like to think there's no reason why it wouldn't be, but we just got to keep pushing and got to keep making sure that our brands are getting out there, and that folks are getting educated and know what's up. And that's part of why it's really cool to see, like, the Tangled Roots documentary I was just talking about, where they come in and they're really capturing, like, the struggle that these legacy farmers went through. Like, we were getting camped out, and it was a stressful thing to be doing. It wasn't like, if you have the funding, you can do whatever you want to. Back in the day, it was like, no, like, you never know when your crop's gonna get chopped. And we all stuck it out. And, a lot of people got kind of duped too, because initially they had proposed the 1 acre cap. And, a lot of people were relying on that. Because up here, you can easily do an acre of cultivation, but anything past that, it's a little bit tricky. We are surrounded by gorgeous mountains and forests. We're not, like, in an ag land place.
Right.
But, we get some amazing product up here. Yeah. And, it's kind of definitely, like, almost getting pushed under the rug in a sense. I mean, we're all fighting to get our head out from under it, but when there's people just mass producing and sending it everywhere, it's definitely throwing off the balance. And it's like,
it's really hard to compete in that marketplace like that. We're just talking about that, like, how do you got to have a way to get to the consumer. How do you get to the consumer when you can't get to the consumer? And it's and that's why really why the black market still thrives, because the non-black market, the horrible legal market that we've created here, has choked out, right, the livelihood of so many people by just the structure of the politics and the cost. And when I was hearing the cost of licensing, and then you throw in the taxation, I'm like, that's just, like, wrong at so many levels to see that kind of cost put down on a producer when they have the highest cost of they have the highest cost in the whole system. Like, theirs is the highest cost. Without those things, right? Without those things, to be a farmer, you have the highest labor, the highest time, the highest expense. Everything is the highest for you, and then everybody else makes more money on your product because. Why? It doesn't make any sense.
That's been happening a lot. A lot of folks don't even bother to produce their own product under their own brand name anymore. A lot of the time it's getting bought in bulk and getting thrown in a different package, and it doesn't say anywhere where that farm is located.
Right.
So they're losing their recognition there, but at the same time it's like, what are these farmers that are supposed to, like, even, for my dad, as I was saying, I had to basically, like, push him into making an Instagram, but it's a reality for people who have been told to hide what they're doing for the last 30, 40 years, and they've been doing the same thing, and then suddenly they're like,
hey, now you gotta tell everybody.
You need to be a marketing professional now. Like, if you want to have a brand that survives, like, you need to be super savvy with Instagram, and you need to be on LinkedIn, and, like, you need to be going to all the B2B events. And it's like, folks that have been hiding on their hill from the cops for years and years and years. And it's like,
not something they want to talk about.
How do you make that transition in 1 year? Even, for me, and I'm a lot younger than most of these people that have been here their whole lives, but you know, like as I was saying, the first time seeing a film crew on our property, I was like, whoa, this does not feel
gonna be right.
And I was like, what can I say and what can I say?
Yeah.
And like, you know, even still when we hear a helicopter, both of my dad like stop dead and we're like, and then we're like, okay, wait, never mind, we're fine. Like,
wow.
But it's, you know, it's weird, and a lot of people didn't really get that time to adjust there. And so
Sure.
it's like, you know, what are you supposed to do when you're 60 years old and, you know, suddenly
That's what you've been doing
you
your
go
whole
from
life.
like just working with your plants and, you know, having that connection in your garden all day, every day, to like being like, all right, I need to be an Instagram celebrity and I
Yeah.
need to be going to all of the networking events and, you
Yeah.
know, I need to establish a fancy brand name and fancy packaging just to even keep up. And so it's, you know, it's honestly kind of really screwing people over up here.
Yeah, it is. It's making it very difficult. And it's also killing the recognition or the opportunity for people to see what this created, right? Because it's getting washed out. It's just being kind of, you know, it's not getting its due right now. It'll probably come back, but right now it's just getting washed out. And unfortunately, that means you're probably going to lose a lot, you know, and hopefully it's not too much.
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen it happening, you know. We have folks that have literally just kept their permits dormant for entire seasons because they can't even afford to run it after paying the tax on it. And, you know, they're like, we don't have any money from paying our employees or soil or genetics or, you know, whatever it is. We have some folks that are like, I can barely afford to pay my employees and I definitely can't afford my genetics right now. And it's like, you know, and at that point, the taxes that the states are forcing people to pay end up coming out of our own pockets because we're not going to like watch our farmers struggle and not be able to grow for a year. We're like, pay us if you can pay us eventually, you know, but here's your seeds. And so it comes back around, as you were saying, it, you know, affects your sales for equipment. It affects every aspect of the cannabis business when folks are running on like such a tight budget and all of their money is going into, you know, the permitting and the taxing and just keeping up with like, you know, what everyone else is doing in the industry. Even just testing your product is like,
it's expensive.
It's super expensive.
Super expensive.
And, you know, they're definitely not intending to find any way to make it easier for people right now, it feels like. So.
No. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense. The testing actually doesn't make any sense at all unless you're looking for pathogen. But you have to do it to test for THC so that you can prove yourself on the scale of value, right? And it's just, that's brutal, man. And if you come in a little bit low there, you're screwed.
Well, you know, we had an instance with some of our really old school farmers in Honeydew that we've been working with for years doing pheno hunting, where they got a whole batch of product tested and it came in at like 18% THC, and they were like, our distributor offered us this price and it's not very good. And we were like, yeah, that's not a good price at all, but we'll tell you what lab to go to. And, you know, I'm not going to say it because I don't want to give them any more clout than they already have, but they went from one lab to the next, and next thing you know, they had 26% THC, and, you know, their product did sell for more, but it shouldn't be like that.
That's a whole
you know?
nother story that just goes back to the whole idea, like, that number means really little.
Yeah,
in the grand scheme of things, it means very, very little.
It doesn't, and a lot of consumers have no idea.
No
clue.
Know,
they're going in and they're like, this says it has 34% THC. Oh my God, you know, that's the one. And you're like, all right, sure.
Have fun. Yeah,
have fun with that. It's funny, my dad and I were joking around the other day. We're like, we wonder if like someone was gonna like sue the state eventually and be like, you know, I got this jar that was supposed to get me super, super stoned, and I smoked it, and I didn't get very stoned at all, and I had an anxiety attack and, you know, a mental breakdown. Or
and now I need help. I need counseling.
You know?
Perfect.
It's like, it is kind of a weird thing, because when you're like proclaiming something to be like uniform in a number and it's a fact and you're selling it to consumers, you'd think that it would actually be a legitimate number.
I knew that was going to happen. You caught it though.
Smooth.
Yeah, super smooth. Yeah, well, I mean, you know, that's exactly what's going to happen. Is there's going to be somebody's going to call it out, and because testing procedures aren't uniform and blah blah blah, and someone's going to sue somebody, and it's all going to come out of the wash, and everybody's going to be like, oh, it's all bullshit anyway. And then maybe somebody will start going, hey man, there's something else in there aside from THC.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
What are terps again?
Yeah, what is that?
I heard a rumor about a terpene once.
Yeah. What is that? Is that the stuff you remove paint with?
Yeah, I really do see it kind of evolving in that direction, or at least I'm keeping my fingers crossed, because you know, as someone who's been.
So are you gonna stay here? Is this your thing? You're gonna be the the queen of seeds
it
in
wasn't
Humboldt?
really ever the official plan, honestly. I kind of was in a position where I had just graduated high school, or actually did like an independent study program and enrolled myself in college when I was like 16, and so I was going to CR. I was kind of starting to think about, you know, going to a different college and kind of moving along and seeing what else was out there. And like right then was kind of when legalization hit. I think I was like 19, and so I wasn't even 21 yet. I was like trying to sneak my way into our dispensary meetings with like a fake ID. He's like, oh, this kind of sucks, but you know, it kind of just got thrown into it. And for a while, we have our partner Ben over in Nevada County, Grass Valley area, but up here it's just my dad and I, and so we kind of just had to put our heads together and start figuring stuff out. And you know, the first few months it was like a lot of me calling Metric and being like, hey guys, like, you know, this is all set up for flower, but like, what do you want me to do for my seeds? Like, does this sound reasonable? And they'd be like, you make seeds? And I'm like, yeah, I do. And they're like, okay, yeah, that sounds good.
What are seeds
sounds
for?
Great, you know, and I'm like, okay. Like, I had to took me a minute to convince them that like we don't need batch testing on our THC for like, or for our seeds, excuse me, for THC and for the pathogens and stuff. There's like the column and Metric where you're supposed to have to put, you know, your test results in and whatnot. And I was like, well, like that doesn't really make sense, guys. And eventually they were like, yeah, you're right. So there's a lot of learning curves for us, but you know, it kind of just all unraveled.
You got
the way
like a square
did.
peg going in a round hole over there. They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, no, they do
Government
not.
doesn't know
They
what
do
they're doing.
not, but
no.
You know, it is what it is. We're all just kind of, you know, trying to.
So you have anything that's really cool that you're holding on to that's coming out?
You know, we have that M30 that we're about to release. It's unnamed
it's not
at this
the unnamed
point.
M30?
The mystery of M30. That one was honestly my all-time favorite from last year's pheno hunting.
Is that right? You know what's funny?
Where you walk up to it and you're just like, oh, this is the one.
That's the one. We went through a naming kind of exercise, and one of our machines was actually almost named the M30. So there you go.
Maybe
it's
we
not,
should just call it that.
There you go. Just call it the M30.
Like, why not? You know, we're running out of options these days.
Yeah,
anyways.
I mean, it's not a bad thing, right? We had the other one was what we're gonna call it the M16.
Yeah, M16.
16 pounds.
Yeah, the M16. When they thought, well, I don't know, man. There might be a little crossover problem with that one. I don't know. We'll figure that out. But yeah, you never know. Someone's got to change it up. It might be the thing.
Yeah, you know.
And honestly, if it is a thing, no one cares what it's called.
Exactly. That's, you know, that's something I've realized more and more, and we're learning to be a little bit more careful with our names and whatnot.
Yeah.
You know, we got a little cease and desist recently from a certain somebody, and we were like, oh man, all right, here it comes. We got to really start thinking about it.
There's a lot of that going, because a lot of guys are making candies and candy bars, and they're knocking off major brands, being just a little too tight to the, with the branding, and it's like, oh yeah, you're gonna get yourself in trouble with that.
Yeah.
Don't mess with any of those big food companies.
And
man.
I don't remember what exactly. They just passed a new thing where they're basically now claiming that any like cannabis merchandise still has to like be very direct, like the brand name has to, somehow like infer what it's related to, and it can't be anything that like attracts children. And
what the fuck
so,
is
like,
cookies gonna do?
That was literally the first thing I thought. I was like, so what about cookies?
Yeah.
Like with the bags all over the place that just say cookies on it. I was like,
oh my God.
That seems like that's gonna be a nightmare for them.
Yeah, it's gonna be
really
a problem
is
for
real,
them.
But it does kind of make sense at the same time. You're like, all right, yeah, I kind of get it. Like,
I'm starting candies. That's my thing.
You're gonna go candy?
Yeah. Oh shit.
Well, but
you
that's
can have a lot of
vague
people
enough,
up your ass on that one. Oh man. Whew. I didn't even check where we're at.
We're right on time.
Right on time.
Wrap it up.
Alrighty.
Cool. So you are on Instagram.
Yeah. So
and
yeah.
are you on the web and you're on Facebook and all that stuff?
Yeah, our company on Instagram is the Humboldt Seed Company.
Awesome.
We're the one with Humboldt spelled with the D and the T.
Nice.
Don't follow the one without the D. But
the electric company.
We've been having a lot of like scam accounts pop up lately.
Oh my
and
God.
It's kind of stressing me out. I think most of our customers will know, but then I'm always like, oh, what about the old lady who gets a DM that's like, Humboldt Seed Co. packs for discount, and and then she spends her disability money, and
Oh
next
man,
thing
we
you know,
don't want
we're
that.
getting yelled at.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're on Instagram.
Okay.
Our website has actually been getting lots more traffic these
Wonderful.
days. We
That's
try to
great.
provide a lot of informational content on there, just so even how to
That's good.
germinate your seed and things that we used to think everyone knows. But
No, they don't.
yeah, the
Yeah.
more we expand, we're like, oh man, you really gotta
help these
start
guys
from the
hold-
bottom.
hold
here.
their hands all the way through the
Exactly.
process, yeah.
Exactly, and we do our best at that. Our customer service rep Hannah has like an amazing patience level, and
That's what
she
they
really
need.
can, like,
You got to have people that have that
oh yeah,
in that
yeah.
area.
We've
For
come to
sure.
realize and accept that when you sell someone a seed, you're not just selling them a seed. They think that you're selling them the final product too.
Yeah.
So you kind of gotta walk them through.
It doesn't look anything like the picture. Okay, all right. So there's this whole time period we didn't talk about. That's awesome. Well, congratulations.
Yeah, and
That's
to
exciting.
you guys as well.
Thank you
honestly.
so much.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was stoked to come down here and chat with
Yeah,
you
thanks
guys.
for coming. Well, I mean, all the way down here.
Yeah,
but
I know. It's not, it's not that far. It's like an hour.
That's still great. I appreciate it a lot. I don't get. It's been a while since I've been up here. About a year, I think. And I was over there in January. Anyway, helping them with machines. We're working with cookies on machines and stuff like that. So. I just don't get the opportunity to come through as much as I used to. When I was in San Diego and I was selling machines, I would just drive up all the time and back and forth.
Yeah.
And I miss it because it really is some of the most beautiful part of the country. It's really
Yeah.
stunning up here.
Yeah, I love it up here.
And I remember that in the winters with the mist and the rain and I camped up here in the campgrounds off the side of the road in Garberville many times in the rain, and that was cool.
Yeah. No, it's honestly, you gotta love it. I had our first rainy day was Saturday of this weekend, and
Oh, wow.
up at our property it's like a geodesic little dome that I stay in, but there's no installation. There's like a big open plastic thing where you can see up into the sky, and
Nice.
so it started coming down on me like at 6:30 in the morning, and I woke up and I had like 5 minutes where I was like, wow, this is beautiful, like, what a life. And then the field, Halle! And I'm like, oh crap, that's
Gotta
right,
cover the
we gotta go
plants.
cover the plants.
Yeah,
But
farmer's
it
work
was
is
like
never done.
That like 5 to 10 minutes where I was just looking up at the rain, and I was like, oh man, I missed this.
Oh, wow. Yeah, but you get, yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's a gorgeous
Awesome.
spot to be.
It's a great
feel
spot to be.
very fortunate to have grown
Yeah.
up here.
And you have property here, so you guys are good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I'm.
If
very
cannabis
lucky about
goes
that.
away,
Oh well, exactly. I mean, and with the whole world in general these days, I'm like, who knows what's gonna happen?
yeah,
And,
it's kind of
like,
crazy right now.
I could see myself just ending up at the farm and building a giant cement wall in the next few years and being like, all right, stay away.
This is my compound. Stay on that side. Put a big golden door in it. There you go.
Right?
Like-
Exactly.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I'm
Yeah, for
definitely
sure.
stoked to have been able to come down and be a part of
Cool.
this.
Well, next time I'll make sure I get all the way up and we'll come see you guys.
Yeah, we would love that. And definitely, even if you're just driving through Eureka, stop by the distro and we'll
For
hook you
sure.
up with some seed packs or whatever. Merch.
I'd just like to see it. I'd love to watch how you guys do stuff. I mean, I don't know. I geek out on equipment, so that's my thing.
Yeah, well, we're always trying to find the new best equipment for what we're doing, and it's a little
Maybe we can
tricky.
help. You never know.
I'm sure you could.
All right. Cool.
All right.
Thank you guys for joining. That concludes our podcast for this week. Don't forget to check us out on all the socials at GreenBroz.